What, did you really think I'd talk about Lance before talking about Lance himself? Well, you were wrong. Lance is an interesting character in Voltron. He's a cocky cargo pilot who quickly finds himself as a humble-ish second in command. He's the team's sharpshooter, the flirt, and generally beloved by fans of the show. And then he was turned into just a love interest towards the back end of the show, but that's besides the point. While yes, I've already briefly talked about him in my big Voltron video, which you should totally watch by the way, I just wanted to talk about Lance as a whole and really just ramble about why I love him as a character. I want to talk about his character assassination towards the end though. I swear. This video won't be too long, but it'll be fun to get my Lance ramblings out of my system. This might be obvious, but Voltron spoilers ahead. Out of the 6 paladins, only 3 really get focus on their bond with their lion, Lance being one of them. Obviously, the black paladins get more screen time with theirs, but Lance consistently has focus on his bond throughout the show. He's the first to bond with the lion, he's the first and almost only paladin to have their lions bond to their element explored, and we actually get to see how much blue means to him on screen. Both Lance and Keith leave their original alliance in the same episode, but only Lance has a goodbye scene. That's not to say Keith and Red don't have a bond. I'm actually pretty disappointed Keith didn't get to say goodbye to Red, but the writers chose to highlight Lance and Blue's relationship, even if it was so they could lead into some allurance scenes, but shut up, don't worry about that. But what about Red? We don't get too much of their dynamic, but I'd like to talk about a certain scene from Season 7. At one point, the Paladins all need to call their lines to Earth, and while most respond, Red doesn't, which made no sense to me at first. Red chose Lance for a reason, and from what I can tell, Red is incredibly loyal to its paladin. Obviously, Red's bond with Keith is probably stronger than its bond with Lance, but Red still comes to Lance's aid when he needs it. So why wouldn't Red come to Lance when he called for her? I've thought about this, it's my 3rd rewatch at this point. God, I've dedicated too much time to the show. Anyways, I've really thought about the scene, and I think Red just doesn't come because Lance and Veronica were spotted before Lance could probably utilize their connection. Out of the 5 paladins, Lance is the only one to be spotted by a Galra ship and attacked prematurely. The scenes were placed a bit weirdly, so I think that's why I was personally confused by it. Leading up to the Galra attacking Lance, we get the paladins connecting to the lions leaving except for Red, and then we see Lance get attacked. And this placement makes it seem like Red just didn't want to come, and Red not showing up is why Lance got attacked, but also I feel like that's not the case. Or at least that's the only logical answer I could think of, especially since Red comes running to him when he's about to die. Side note, I was rewatching the scene again just to get my bearings around it, and I noticed you can actually hear Lance's connection with Red being established when he wakes up after the crash. It's easy to miss because his ears are already ringing. I thought that was a cool little thing that they added in. A lot of people depict Red and Lance's relationship as fickle, but I really don't think that's the case. Red is the pickiest out of all the lions. There is no way she'd choose a paladin she wouldn't be loyal to. So Lance isn't much of a leader when he starts off. We basically start the show watching as a team crumbles under his lead. But as time goes on, we can see the makings of a leader. He acts as Keith's impulse control and comes up with a strategy to get into a control center. He notices that there's a fake rover in the castle when nobody else does, and has been there time and time again when his teammates need help working through something. He's a strategist, perceptive, and steps up to help his teammates when needed. And while, yes, Lance did a terrible job at working with Pidge back in the garrison, that's not entirely his fault. He tried to reach out to her, only for Pidge to shoot him down. He wanted to work as a functioning team and understands that to work together properly, he needs to have a good relationship with those he's leading. But he can't exactly do that when Pidge is off avoiding him and Hunk in order to focus on her own side quest. Obviously, they're at least friendly with each other, since Lance and Hunk were able to easily talk to her in the pilot, but that bond they have later in the show, not even close to what they have in the pilot. Lance goes from somebody who can't get Keith to give his order a second thought to Keith going out of his way to trust Lance in leading the team. He goes from a cocky cargo pilot to the right hand of Voltron. Right as we meet him, Lance makes it blatantly clear that he's a cocky character who is seemingly bad at leading his own team. Again, it's somewhat implied that Pidge was a partial reason behind their terrible teamwork in episode 1. Although, despite his initial cockiness, I can't help but take note of his reaction to Iverson's lecture just a few minutes later. A truly cocky character would scoff and shrug off Iverson's jab at the fact Lance is only a fighter pilot because his classmate, Keith, was expelled, but he doesn't. Instead, Lance takes the words thrown at him and looks as if he's about to break into tears. So right off the bat, we as a viewer are shown that he might not be as full of himself as he wants us to think he is. Of course, he's pretty quick to put his cocky persona back on as he forces Hunk to sneak out with him. Now, I'm not saying his cockiness is entirely a facade. Later in the show, Lance states that he was pretty full of himself, but it's interesting to see how early they decided to hint at his insecurities, to show that, in a sense, he's all bark but no bite. Despite his cockiness, he is very insecure about his place on the team, even after Shiro and Allura and Keith all tell him that they need him. This facade is also shown through how he interacts with people. He claims to hate and not trust Keith at the beginning of the show, but compliments and admires him behind his back. He acts distrustful of Lotor, but in actuality he was just as fooled by him as everyone else was. He flirts with any girl he sees, but, as stated by his mom, he's all talk. He flirts, but then supposedly doesn't follow through with pursuing a relationship. As stated by Lance himself, he was the one breaking hearts. Which, yeah, okay, that could be an exaggeration from an unreliable source, but it'd line up with how his mom described him as to Allura. While Lance is cocky, he is definitely harboring insecurities that aren't addressed at all. But I've already talked about that in my Big Voltron video, so whatever. You know, despite what the fandom may actually make it seem, Lance sure does suggest fleeing a lot. There have been multiple instances of Lance either siding with the idea of running away from a fight or flat out being the one to suggest it. On paper, this is probably so Keith has somebody to butt heads with, as he almost always wants to stay and fight, but I just find this trait of Lance's really interesting, as when somebody he cares about is in danger, he chooses to stay and take a hit for them. Obviously, this trait has been talked about a lot by fans. It's happened 3 times, how could we not talk about it? But I just want to briefly address it here. Back in the first episode, Lance ditched Hunk, which led to a fake-out death on Hunk's part and a near-death experience on Lance's. He's mortified by the fact he just left his friend to die, and obviously isn't ready to follow in his lead. Now I bring this up because it's this moment that we all seem to agree triggered Lance's need to protect those around him. We saw hints of Lance looking out for others before this. He saved Pidge from saying something she'd regret when speaking to Iverson, and caught Allura as she fell from her cryopod, before he knew she was pretty. Like, he was a fair distance away. He didn't need to run over and catch her. So he had already been quick to help people in low-stakes situations. But Hunk's fake-out death may have been what made him realize there may be more he needs to do. So he protects Koran from an explosion, saves Allura from an ion cannon and dies from it, but I won't get into it because that would just lead to me ranting about his character assassination, attacks Zethrid for threatening Pidge, and stays to protect Veronica from an enemy Galra. He's learned that he needs to fight for those he loves. Whenever he suggests Voltron flees, it can be read as him trying to keep the team safe. Also, side note, did anyone else notice that he stopped suggesting they run once they got back to Earth? He was dead set on protecting his home. Also, side note, has anyone else noticed how different Lance's reactions are to possibly blowing up in the pilot episode compared to the season 7 finale? In the pilot, he's terrified of dying and winces, but in the season 7 finale, he's looking death straight on and taking it a lot better than everybody else. Keith looks angry, Hunk's tearing up, Pidge doesn't seem to entirely process what's about to happen, Allura looks remorseful, and Lance seems ready. That's really upsetting. I mean, it makes sense. He came to terms with dying what must have been a few hours before, so he already went through his grieving process, but man, lightning round, because these next few points were too small for their own sections. Lance is obviously the most interested in the glory aspect of being a paladin than anybody else on the team. Him being into the glory might make him seem like the least interested in keeping people safe, but in reality, he's the one who sacrificed himself the most. Lance has this weird need to use the stupidest phrases ever. Like, he says holy crow a lot. That's the only one I can remember from the top of my head, but I think this ties in with the fact that I noticed I think he's the one who says Quiznack the most out of the humans on the castle ship. It's a stupid word, so it makes sense that he'd like latch onto it. I know I talked about his views on Lotor earlier, but I wanted to mention again, he may have disliked Lotor, but he did trust him. He has a genuine moment where he asks Lotor what his next plan is, and there's no malice in his voice. I just find that interesting. Speaking of Lotor and Lance's jealousy towards him, Lance's characterization in season 8 makes me really upset, and his ending even more so, because what do you mean he ends up as a farmer hung up on his dead girlfriend? I already talked about this in my big Voltron video, so I'll keep this brief. Towards the midpoint of Voltron, we started to get hit with relationship drama. Great. Specifically, a love triangle. Double great. It's made blatantly obvious that Lance has a crush on Allura from the first second he lays eyes on her. While she doesn't reciprocate at first, she eventually grows fond of Lance and the two end up dating in the last season. But before they reach the point of dating, Allura has a brief relationship, and I mean brief. That relationship officially lasted a whole 5 seconds with Lotor. But despite it being brief, she and Lotor had an unspecified amount of time leading up to it where they harbored feelings for each other. Everybody on the castle ship knew they were into each other, and due to this, Lance got mopey. This wasn't too bad at first. He'd make a jab at Lotor every now and again and sulk whenever Allura and Lotor were off doing something, but he still had some semblance of a character outside of that. It's once Lotor leaves that his character takes a dip in quality. To be honest, Allura's characterization also sort of spiraled downwards when she began developing feelings for Lotor. She became this dainty character around him, and I generally just didn't like what they did to her. But this is a Lance video, so I need to move on. While Lance's character doesn't quite center on Allura until season 8, there is obviously a shift. In season 6, he straight up dies for her, only to have it not be acknowledged by anybody at all. In season 7, he's repeatedly called the dumb one. While he does get a few scenes showcasing his sharpshooting skills, it's just why? Not even gonna touch upon season 8 or else this video will just keep dragging on, but just know Lance's only character trait is basically just being Allura's boyfriend and staying by her side while she's in a coma. Okay, rant over. Did you all know McLean isn't canonically his last name in this iteration of Voltron? It's only really Shiro, Pidge, and Karan who have canon last names. Everybody else doesn't have anything confirmed, so this has just been the fandom interpreting what it's been in previous iterations. I don't know why I put that here and not in the lightning round, but oh well. Anyways, thank you so much for watching my stupid ramble video. What are your thoughts on Lance? Love him, hate him, maybe mixed feelings? Let me know in the comments. Like I mentioned earlier, I have a video on Voltron as a whole, so if that interests you, please check it out. If you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing. I make art and commentary videos, and your support would mean the world to me. My Etsy shop and social media is linked in the description below if either of those things interest you. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later. Bye!